All right. Well, welcome to the first session of the How to Buy a Farm webinar series. Very glad you're joining us today. I'm Nathan Aaberg of the Land Connections Illinois FarmLink program, and I'm joined by Kathy Roof and Mike Ghia of Land for Good. This webinar series grew out of the extensive work our two organizations have done writing a guide we call How to Buy a Farm, a Guide for Farmers. This resource is a comprehensive overview of the many aspects of buying a farm, from financing and searching to building your professional team and working through the negotiation process. We undertook this project because when we at Illinois FarmLink wanted to help farmers looking for land, with one single guide, we literally couldn't find one, and it seemed desperately needed. Farmers we talk to are having a very hard time with high farmland prices and navigating the time-consuming complexities of the search and purchase process. The guide is going to be over 130 pages, and it's in the process of being graphically designed, and the public release is expected by the beginning of 2026. We wrote it primarily with first-time farm buyers in mind, but we believe that it will likely offer new insights and wisdom for growers of all kinds who have already bought farmland. On behalf of the Land Connection, I want to express gratitude to Kathy and Mike and Land for Good for being such dedicated and knowledgeable partners in the writing of the guide, and for being leaders in the farmland access field that has grown so much in the last 20 years. I also want to express our gratitude to the Land Connections funders that made this possible: the USDA Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program, Food Land Opportunity, otherwise known as FLOW, and Builders Initiative. Although I am coming to you from Illinois and will share examples from Illinois, and although Kathy and Mike are coming from England, this guide is applicable in almost every way to farmers around the country, regardless of the type of farming you do. Our hope is that the guide, along with these webinars, will enable farmers like you to have less stress and more success in finding and securing the farmland you need. We also wrote this guide, by the way, to help the many service providers out there who help farmers secure farmland access. We hope the guide and the webinar series together further equip you in your valuable work and are useful tools for sharing with growers you support. Kathy, you want to take it from there?
Sure, thank you, and good morning or afternoon to everyone. And I thank Nathan and the Land Connection for our partnership in producing this publication. Briefly, Land for Good, some of you are familiar with us, others not so much. We were founded in 2004 to promote farmland access, tenure, and transfer. So all the ways farmers get onto land, hold land, and pass on farms and farmland. We educate and coach farmers and landowners. We work with farm seekers and guide lease development. We also do training of service providers across the country. We do research projects and engage in advocacy. And we also produce educational materials and tools, such as this guide. Ultimately, we seek to make land more affordable, accessible, equitable, and secure. So a couple of comments about farm purchasing as a strategy for land access. Some of you may know that land access has been repeatedly reported as the biggest challenge for beginning farmers. How land is held, by whom, and under what conditions has, in fact, always been a subject of study and debate. And while land ownership has been firmly embedded in our culture, 40% of US farmers rent some or all of the land that they farm. And in fact, there are widely ranging beliefs about private property ownership. And in the years, the more than 3 decades that I've been doing this work, it's always fascinated me how people and groups and communities think about land access. For some, private property ownership, such as the ownership of farms and farmland, is the ultimate goal. Land builds wealth, land is power. For some, private ownership of land is anathema. They choose not to own land for various personal reasons and values. We also in this country do have a myth of land ownership, that really you're only a real farmer if you own your own farm. For many farmers, ownership is the goal, and maybe many of you on this webinar have that in mind. If and when possible, land ownership builds wealth. And yes, there is emotional attachment that is perhaps the greatest that anyone can feel by ownership. You have maximum control, and in fact, land tenure can be a path. So there are many farmers that start out leasing and then may own a small farmstead and then add to their holding. So the path can be varied and can be creative. So for many, the dream lives and can be attained. That's not without challenges. Clearly, buying a farm is a significant life event, and farmland costs are out of reach, especially for most new and beginning farmers. The research I did online just in preparation for today showed me that the national average for all farmland is about $4,300 an acre. It's almost $6,000 for cropland. And in parts of the Northeast, and I'm sure other regions as well, it's in excess of $14,000 an acre. So you can see where the barrier is considerable. Not only that, but there's fierce competition for existing land, not only to purchase, but to rent. And it's really hard for especially new and beginning farmers to compete with established farmers. And often available land is not even on the market before it is grabbed up. So new and beginning farmers, like many of you on this webinar, don't have the equity, can't cash flow payments in your startup years. Not only that, but findability is a challenge. Notwithstanding all of the FarmLink programs, it's really hard to actually find a suitable property and then to assess it. Farmers of color and other marginalized communities, of course, face additional challenges. There's discrimination by landowners, real estate professionals, lenders. There's unequal power dynamics. There may be language barriers. And for everyone who's a farm searcher, it's hard to find the support, providers, creative lenders, and so on. On the other hand, there's a lot more awareness of the challenges. There's more attention to social justice by sellers and by providers as well. And there's more curiosity about sort of less traditional approaches. So as Nathan said, we hope that you feel more informed and empowered through this webinar, and especially by looking at the guide when it comes out to explore land ownership, and that you'll find some helpful hints, useful resources, and most of all, encouragement. So I'll pass it back to Nathan to start with his presentation. What we're going to do is, are we going to talk about the Q&A part, Nathan?
Yeah, I'm going to say a few more words. I'll just jump in. Kathy, thank you so much for setting the context. That was really helpful. I'd now like to orient everyone sort of to how this webinar is going to work. This is the first of 3 sessions of the webinar series. The next will be next Thursday, which will talk about the variety of ways of buying a farm that aren't using 2 agents, a public listing, and bank lending. The final session on November 20th will dwell on some of the professional service providers you will likely use in your search and purchase, including real estate agents, lenders, and attorneys. In today's session, I'll begin by providing a broad overview of the many ways there are to find and locate a suitable and affordable farm property. Mike will then give a presentation of the fundamentals of the overall farmland purchase process. We'll then have a quick Q&A right at that point. And then we're going to have 2 farm businesses share their personal and unique experiences of buying farms that I think you're going to find really useful. And another Q&A session will follow after that. One quick note, I want to say that all the speakers you will hear today have been challenged by the short time frame we have to work with when dealing with such complex topics. We have done our best, but hope you will understand that we've had to leave some details out and simplify some things as well. Please mute your video and your audio if possible, so there is as much bandwidth and as little distraction as possible for everyone's learning. For asking any questions, please use the chat function, which you have already probably found down at the bottom of the screen. In the interest of time, we will be choosing which questions to pose to the presenters based on time available and what questions seem like they would have the most interest for a wide audience. You will receive our emails so that you can use that for following up with one-on-one questions. We'll officially end at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, but we will continue a Q&A session after that for about 10 minutes to sort of squeeze in some more dialogue. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available as a YouTube eventually. We also urge everyone attending to be respectful and compassionate in your interactions with our speakers and other attendees. And as an extra perk, you will be notified as soon as the guide is available as a PDF. Without further ado, let's jump in. I'm now going to share my screen. Okay, can everyone see my screen? I hope. All right, we're going to start up. So this is all about how to find a farm as part of the purchase process. As quick background, Illinois FarmLink is a program of the Land Connection, which is a food and farming nonprofit based in Champaign. Our goal is to improve our food and farming system in Illinois so that it benefits eaters, farmers, communities, as well as the land and water. Illinois FarmLink is one of the many programs the Land Connection offers. We are all about connecting farmers with land, landowners with farmers, empowering them in their search and in their work. We offer a website profile system that you can search. And we also offer a variety of education and resources. In this short presentation, I want to talk about 3 topics. One is the preparation for your search and how preparation for your search can actually make you more efficient, more successful, hopefully, and at least reduce the stress a little bit. We're going to talk about next sort of how you can look through the existing real estate industry, through listings, agents, that kind of thing. And then we're going to talk about some of those ways of finding properties beyond listings, beyond the real estate industry, which we think is really important. Quick note, Illinois has a wide variety of farming types and farming scales. We have commodity cropping at a very large scale, and we also have local food farming at a smaller scale and everything in between. What we're talking about, I think, will be of interest to everyone and have applicable lessons. But it's also, I think, fair to say that there are service providers who feel more comfortable with one or the other, and that's something to sort of watch out for. We really do advise doing some preparation before you start getting out there and sort of just equipping yourself to be ready for whatever is going to come your way. We've thought of 7 different elements of preparation. One is a farm business plan. Mike we'll talk more about that as well, but a good farm business plan really grounds your operations and your planning, makes you understand who you're going to be selling to, what you're going to be growing, where your customers are, and that can really help you guide your search for what kind of farm and farmland that you need. Finances are key. A lot of beginning farmers are sort of just getting a grasp of their finances and how to manage that and how to build their equity. Having a good advisor who can help you figure out what you can afford, maybe whether it makes sense to wait a little bit longer, can be extremely helpful. It's really helpful to write down your farmland needs, and not just what farmland you need in terms of acreage and infrastructure now, but also in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's a lot of work buying farmland. So the more you can think ahead, the more you can sort of prevent running out of space and needing to look for new farmland. What are your non-farming needs? Very basic example. If you or your partner have an off-farm job, then you're going to want to sort of keep that in mind for the location as well. Where you're going to sort of look, do some thinking about what would be a good location. What is your search strategy? Are you going to be mostly looking through listings? Ideally, we would recommend sort of having a diverse strategy of looking through listings, looking at what's being offered in auctions, and using lots of other strategies as well. And the 7th one might not be sort of something you normally think about, but we would encourage you to sort of make it easy for you to be remembered. So if you're building a network and you're trying to look at opportunities that might otherwise not be out there in the public, if you can figure out how you can be remembered by the people that you meet who might be willing to help you, that can be super helpful. Like a flyer or information sheet can really help in that way. A great resource that Land for Good has for the preparation phase is the necessary, desirable, and optional worksheet that helps you really think hard about what needs you have around farmland that are absolutely necessary. You just absolutely need those. It might be a certain kind of soil. It might be a certain kind of infrastructure. What needs are desirable, like really helpful, and which ones are strictly optional. What can often happen from what we've seen is sometimes people can get emotionally attached to a property and kind of lose their bearings as far as what they actually need. Around the topic of the focus area for your search, We've seen some different philosophies. If you have nothing to anchor you in any particular location or state or county, sometimes you can look pretty broadly and take the best opportunity that comes up, the best deal. For many people, however, there's usually some sort of anchor. The anchor might be family, might be off-farm jobs, it might be needing to be close to an airport so you can get to other family. Sort of knowing that center of where you want to be, that anchor can be super helpful. And there are advantages of having a focus area because when you're trying to build connections and network and find those opportunities that aren't in listings, the more focused you are, the more effort and time you can spend in building relationships. So the real estate industry in the United States is a huge thing. It's a 1.7 trillion and it's expected to keep climbing. That includes farmland real estate. Any large industry, any large market has its systems for moving things along. So let's just talk about what those systems are that relate to farmland purchasing. So one is the system of agents, realtors, and brokers. The guide goes into more detail about what the differences between those are. The key thing is that agents, realtors, brokers serve as go-betweens and can also provide lots of professional advice about what you buy and how much you buy it for. And then there's also listings and that feed into multiple listing services. And then the aggregation sites that we all know about, like Realtor.com, Zillow, that kind of thing. And finally, there's auctions. We're not going to cover auctions very much, but they're also part of the system that you should pay attention to. A key thing with agents is to know who the agent is representing. A buyer's agent is representing your interests. The seller's agent is obviously representing the landowner's interests. And it's really important to sort of keep that in mind when you're talking to agents, especially the seller's agents, so that you are thoughtful and discreet about what you share that might affect the negotiations. Dual agency is when an agent is serving both the buyer and seller. Obviously, that's a special situation that has a lot of potential for conflict of interest, but it does happen. And then there's also the question of agents. From our experience at Illinois FarmLink, we've come across agents and brokers who are very comfortable with residential and farmettes, like smaller farms. And we've also come across some agents and brokers who much prefer working on commercial properties and larger properties. But they sometimes have a gray area in between where they both will serve similar markets. How do you choose an agent? One thing we've seen is that there are some agents who know a lot about farmland, and there's a lot of agents who don't know too much about farmland. If at all possible, it's great if you can find someone who's an experienced real estate agent in the area you want to be, and also knows something about farming and farmland properties. They're not out there, and there are not a huge number of them, but if you can find that kind of person, they can be extremely helpful. You want to make sure that they have capacity in their schedule, that they can give you time and energy and attention and not be pulled in a million different directions. You want someone who's eager to serve you and get the best deal and not just get the transaction done. References can be super helpful. If you know other farmers who have used that same agent, that can be a really helpful thing. We've had one situation where someone checked the online social media feeds for an agent and found that they weren't really friendly to the kind of community that person was coming from. And so that's something you probably want to know. There's also just your gut feeling. One of the sort of the main interfaces that a lot of farmers use to look for land is through the aggregator sites like Realtor.com. 2 quick points about those. Number one, you can set up these automated searches that will keep on sending you updates about new properties that come on the market with the specifications you want. So for example, in this pull-up window, you can see that we've checked for the lot size to be 5 acres or more and 15 acres or less, so in that space. We would recommend that you think very carefully about the region or city that's set for the search, because sometimes the city might have narrow boundaries in that system, and you might miss some opportunities that are just on the outskirts that aren't within the city itself. The second thing is I think most people probably have had experience with where the listing is kind of different from what you see and experience when you actually get there. I mean, they use obviously photography and their words to make it look as appealing as possible. You want to have some discretion and you want to verify things that are said in that listing. An example of someone who used listings, Greta Winkelbauer in Northern Illinois. She literally checked listings every single day for 4 straight years before she found the right property. And her search was difficult because they were looking for a property that would have infrastructure already there that would be easily modified for goat dairy. And I think her story also reminds us that this search can take time. So the sooner you can begin and get going and start searching, the better off you're going to be. And I want to mention one more thing about the listings. One of the benefits of using listings so much is that you can get a sense of the market. You can get a sense of what is going for what price with what location and what infrastructure. So that's a good benefit as well. And then just recently I had a chance to talk with a farmland broker who's more in the commercial side of things, which means kind of large scale business. And in Illinois, these brokers are selling properties that are larger, like 40 acres, 60 acres, 200 acres. And one of the things he said is that a lot of their listings are not going to appear in an aggregator site. So if you're looking for something of medium size or larger size, definitely worth checking out these commercial brokers that are operating in your area and checking the site probably every week to see if something new has popped up, because it's not going to appear on the aggregator site. And then Mike's going to talk more about evaluating properties, but one of the things we recommend is that you don't need to visit every property that has a remote chance of being the good property. There are online tools that you can use for looking at soil types, terrain, flooding risks, well data. Zoning is especially important. We've heard of stories of people buying a farm and then finding out that the zoning of that municipality actually didn't permit them to have certain kinds of livestock. So zoning is certainly key information. This next section, I'd just like to talk a little bit about other ways of locating properties because many properties never become available through public listings. And if you only look at public listings, you're going to be missing the opportunity for other property options being out there. One is for sale by owner or private sale. This is a pretty prevalent one. It can be. In that situation, the landowner is deciding not to use a seller's agent and is just trying to make a direct transaction with someone. The signage can be by the road. It can be in their window. Sometimes there's no signage at all, but they are out there. And so you need to figure out a way of sort of being aware of them, and being tied into the community can help you do that. There are also virtual channels like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist. You can email your customer list if you already have one that's in that area and see what kind of connections they have. And then farm linking websites, which we'll talk more about. There's probably not time to read this all, but this was a Craigslist message on July 1st, 2015 for a landowner in Wisconsin looking for essentially a successor. And a family in New York that were really into the food industry saw this and contacted him. 10 years later, that young family owns that land and is growing organic wheat of different kinds. These are FarmLink sites. Several points. They usually have profiles that you can sort of search and filter by location, acreage, that kind of thing. Those are worthwhile. Oftentimes, farm linking programs have a harder time attracting landowners than farmers, so you may not have a large number. So I would highly recommend that you talk to the staff of a FarmLink program and see what other advice they have in addition to the website. And then there's old school methods, word of mouth. And one of our tips would be find people who have lots of connections, like bankers or real estate agents or brokers. We also have heard of people doing direct mail campaigns. You can find online addresses for farmland properties, and you can with addresses for the owners that you can then send a letter to. In the direct mail world, if you get a response rate of 0.5% or 1%, that you're doing really good. So with those kind of snail mail campaigns, you have to be expecting a lot of no's, but it can open doors. And then finally, there's actual real bulletin boards. One of our staff, her husband, went to a gas station, and on a bulletin board, there was a little slip of paper of someone wanting to sell their farmland. And they ended up working at a for sale by owner deal. And here's another just sort of another example of those sort of under the radar kind of opportunities. A pocket listing essentially is a situation where a realtor or a broker has a landowner who wants to sell a property through them, but doesn't want to do a public listing. And the broker that we talked to said, yeah, you should talk to brokers, let them know what you're looking for in case they ever have that kind of property come up. And finally, we want to highlight that there are programs out there to help you in different kinds of ways that you can tap in different kinds of ways. FarmLink programs, we've already talked about those. Land trusts are nonprofits dedicated to the preserving of farmland and natural areas from development. They oftentimes have great community connections with landowners. They can be worth talking to. There are other nonprofits out there, as well as investor groups looking to help farmers of different kinds access land. An example of a nonprofit helping farmers in the Chicago area is the Conservation Fund's Chicago Metro Farms Fund. If they might be under the radar, but what's really awesome about what they do, they will help a farmer identify a piece of property, find it. They will buy it for the farmer. They will then put an easement on it later on, which reduces the market value of that property. And then they will sell it to the farmer. So it's a really hands-on kind of service. I'm sorry this has been so short, but we're gonna, I've covered what I need to. If you ever need to reach out to us, please reach out. We are next gonna transition to Mike. And I wanna just briefly introduce you, Mike, if you don't mind. Mike is Land for Good's Vermont field agent. He grew up on a farm and has been involved with agriculture since childhood. He farmed full-time for 10 years on leased land and continues to run a part-time maple syrup operation. In addition to doing work for Land for Good for well over a decade, Mike also contracts to do work for the University of Vermont Extension Farm Viability Program as a farm business planner. Please take it away, Mike. Let me see if I can get out here.
All right. Good afternoon, I think is almost the case for everybody now. So I'm going to cover over the next half an hour or so, 4 areas: property evaluation and assessment, financing and lenders, making an offer and negotiations, and taking the contract through to closing. This is going to be rapid fire, pretty quick. But as we've been mentioning, the guide is going to be fairly in depth, and this will give you a flavor of what's to come when the guide comes available. So first thing on property evaluation, I didn't put the links in here. We can send the links out later. But these are in our guide. These were 4 checklists that we were aware of that help people evaluating properties, whether you're leasing them or owning them, including our own evaluation checklist at Land for Good, kind of maybe stimulate you to think about some of the things you might not otherwise think about as far as evaluating a property. So then where do you gather a lot of this information that you're going to need to know to make a good decision about whether this property is the right property for you? If the property is listed with a real estate agent, then pretty much I think across the country, you're going to find that the real estate agents will have a property disclosure form. Hopefully even some people doing for sale by owner will also have a property disclosure form. The ones that are generally out there and generally used that we're familiar with are really going to focus in on the house and not on and the property maybe in general, but not really the agricultural infrastructure or the farmland. So you're going to find that that's generally lacking for giving you the information you need. And the disclosure forms are not usually posted on the aggregator sites or even their own sites. That's usually something you're going to have to get by either viewing the property or just reaching out to the real estate agent. But along with the disclosure form, which will go through things like the septic system, the roof, and so forth, you're going to the real estate agent hopefully will have a larger packet of information for you that may have some more of the farm-based information that you might need. But, you know, as Nathan already said, a lot of real estate agents aren't really thinking about farms, and except if you're in a really agricultural area. And so they may not have things like soils maps and field acreage maps, or you know, any kind of the other things that you might want to know about, say, the capacity of the barn or the capacity of feed storage and so forth. And so that's stuff that you're going to have to generally ask for or look for in other ways they'll talk about. Auctioneers will put together similar information packets, which may or may not be, you know, more complete. Sometimes you'll see it's been listed by a real estate agent and it's being listed at auction at the same time. And so between the two of them, hopefully they'll put out a lot of the information you need. But there'll often not be everything that you're going to need to know if it's really going to be a good farm for you. And so you're going to need to ask questions of the real estate agent, through at least through the real estate agent. If possible, it's often good if you can get the real estate agent to allow you to ask questions directly of the seller, because even when you're being shown a property, often they're shooing away the sellers, and sometimes the real estate agent, if they're not familiar with agriculture, just don't have enough knowledge to even present your question to the owner or the tenant farmer in a way that you're going to get good information back. And so if you can bypass the agent, it's sometimes a better scenario and less playing telephone. And so where else can you get some of the information you're going to need? Nathan mentioned some of these. USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service and Farm Service agencies have acreage maps and other maps of the practices that they've implemented, but you're going to need to get permission from the owner, or they're going to need to have permission from the owner to be able to share it. Of course, the government also needs to reopen. But there you can often get some of the more detailed information you're going to need that's already prepared for you. Same thing with local conservation districts. As Nathan mentioned, there's the Web Soil Survey. We also point people to the UC Davis Web Soils. If you're not familiar with that, it's a stripped down version of the USDA Web Soil Survey that's a lot easier to navigate, though you won't be able to make print maps without doing just a print screen from the UC Davis site. Nathan mentioned state and county JS mapping sites. Besides soils, these sites can sometimes be helpful in assessing other things like mapped wetlands, floodplain. We have a tool in Vermont, the Vermont Natural Resources Atlas, that I use all the time, and I can actually calculate field acreage with it. I can put the flood layers for most counties on there. And wetlands, sometimes the conservation layers there, I can find out if there's already a conservation easement on it. Not every state or county has these. Most don't, but they're useful when you can find them. If you think you're in a flood zone at all, it's worth looking for the FEMA flood maps. Nathan already mentioned zoning, which could be particularly important if you're going to do something that's not traditionally farming, like agritourism or value-added products. Land trusts can be very helpful, or other conservation organizations. If there's already an easement on there, they've probably got all the maps you need, or if they're working with you to see about putting a conservation easement on it, a lot of times they can pull the information together for you. If the farm is certified for organic, then there should be a bunch of information the organic certifier could provide, though they're also probably going to need to get permission from the seller to be able to do that. And again, you have to a lot of times ask the owner questions because not all the information is going to be there, or the tenant farmer, because the owner may not actually be the farmer and may not know the information that you need. Now, if the tenant farmer is going to lose the farm, they may not want to talk to you, the farmland, but in many cases, if they're just content and understanding about that, they'll be willing to talk with you. Other neighbors can also be helpful. When you get on the farm, some of the things that you should be considering, and again, those 4 checklists I mentioned will kind of help guide you through. Compare the soils to the maps. Is stuff that's mapped as prime ag soil, does it actually seem when you put a shovel in it or a soil probe, does it actually seem to be prime? Do you see anything that is out of the ordinary with the soil? Are there areas of erosion or areas of siltation from flood damage? I looked at one property in the next town over for me once, and I was looking at the soils map, and it's supposed to be a silt loam, and I'm wondering, this looks like sand. And then I asked and found out that the property owner had sold the topsoil to a developer before he put it on the market. So we were really just looking at the subsoil. Inspect artificial drainage systems, conditions of the buildings and infrastructure. When you're viewing the farm, you may want to bring some other advisors along, people that know maybe better about how to evaluate the condition of a barn, or any of the facilities. Look for farm dumps. Ask about the history of spreading of biosolids. This has become a particular issue as we've been finding PFAS contamination and heavy metal contamination around the country. And that's often not going to show up on a disclosure form, and they probably haven't even tested for it. And again, talk to the farm owner or the neighbors or farmers in the community. All right, so now you think you got a place that you want to consider buying. So now you have to figure out what to offer. And the first thing is, what can you afford? What is really practical? There's no sense in you offering anything you can't actually afford. And as Nathan already said, the business plan is the most critical guide for this. And particularly looking at the cash flow projections that show what you can afford with a mortgage and all of the carrying costs. One thing that we see a lot of is that people will make they'll focus on the text, and they'll have a lot of flowery descriptions of their business and such. And, most of the lenders are not that concerned about it, except maybe your marketing plan. If you're not going to be just shipping commodities, sending grain to the nearest mill or milk through the co-op, they're going to want to know, how do you plan on selling this stuff? Where are you going to sell it? And how do you justify the price? Otherwise, the lender is going to look at it, and they don't care what your projections are if they don't have confidence that you can actually sell and fulfill your business plan. But otherwise, they're really looking and saying, do you have good, sound financials? Can you show what your business has been doing to date? And how is it going to apply to this specific farm? How are you going to make it work with this farm? Including all of the carrying costs, which I'll talk about more in a second. Certainly include off-farm income and any cash that you have available in this, in the cash flow statements, in the planning documents. One thing I see people underestimate or don't fully account for is, what are their needs going to be for, say, expansion? They might need more livestock. They might need more equipment. They might need to be retrofitting things. And so you're probably looking at an additional chattel loan. If you're not familiar with that, loans are usually referring to all your livestock and equipment, the means of the production, and what are the needs in this farm. And so, yeah, maybe you can pay for the mortgage, but then you don't have enough money to be able to actually implement your plan, because you haven't also accounted for, can I take on additional loans, or do I have additional cash to make all the retrofits or expand the amount of equipment that I have to be able to successfully operate this farm. One thing that I really caution people is to don't plan on using all of your cash in the transaction. A lot of times people come to us and I'll say, how much money do you have? And towards the sale, and they'll tell me a certain number. And I said, how much other money do you have cash on hand? And they're one and the same. And that's really a risky situation to put yourself in. And a lot of times it won't even be acceptable to the lenders. Because you want to see that there is operating capital there, that you're not always just relying on operating loans, or uh, other sources of capital coming from the outside to be able to cash flow the business. Um, and you want to have some cash reserves for family and business. I tell people the general rule of thumb is you want to have 3 to 6 months of family living expenses in a reserve, in a lockbox, in case something goes wrong. And so putting that, say, or our dream is to buy this piece of real estate, and then depleting your reserve is a big mistake, because you don't know when there could be a car accident, a farm accident, or some other problem, some other catastrophe, whether it's a flood or a tornado or something. And then not only is your business not performing like it should, but you may have some other bigger expenses that you need to carry out, and you've got nothing to work with. And that's just a recipe for disaster. So now you've kind of had a sense of what you can afford, and that may change as you look at different properties and you look at different scales and different amounts of maintenance or renovations that you might have to do. You may be adjusting your business plans as you go along. Um, but now you're looking at how do we finance this? And the focus here and the focus of the guide is generally traditional bank financing, or lender, I should say lender financing, though we will talk, particularly next week and in the guide, we do talk about some other alternative approaches. One thing to know is that a residential mortgage is often not available for the purchase of a farm. The times where that will be available to you is if you are buying it exclusively with off-farm income, and the person that has that off-farm income is planning on keeping that job after the purchase of the farm. And then that the farm is of a certain size or configuration where really it's a residential property, because many lenders want to sell the mortgage on the secondary market, which doesn't want to generally deal with farm properties. So if you're going to be buying a farm using your farm income to pay that mortgage, or it's just a commercial farm in that nature, you're going to end up with a commercial mortgage rather than a residential mortgage in most cases. The term lengths of a commercial loan can be different. Sometimes they will not go out as far as 30 years, as often the case with a 30-year mortgage. They may only go out 20 or 25 years. But on the other hand, Farm Service Agency at USDA, they can go out for 40 years. One thing I always caution people to think about is that, want people to think about is the longer term gives you lower payments, but more interest is paid over time. However, typically these days you can prepay the principal on the mortgage, and I emphasize principal because you want to make it clear to your lender that that's what you're doing. You're not just making payments of interest and principal ahead of time. You're actually putting it towards principal so you can pay down that loan. So if the cash flow works better for you at a 30-year term, or a 40-year term, and you can't make it work on a 20-year term or less, then go for the longer term. And if you have the ability later on to pay down that mortgage early, pay it down early. Commercial interest rates are generally higher than residential rates with most conventional lenders. But on the other hand, USDA's Farm Service Agency, or FSA, usually has the lowest interest rates available in any kind of mortgage. Farm credit is often more in that commercial mortgage interest rate level, but they're a cooperative that typically provides a dividend to its lender members. And so like Farm Credit East, here in the Northeast, it's typically 1% of the loan each year that the borrower can get back. So you have to take that into account when you're comparing farm credit to, say, a different lender. Another thing that I always emphasize to people is keep in mind that while you're trying to build equity here, you're paying mostly interest early on and not earning much equity, especially if you've got one of these very long-term loans. And so it's going to take time before you're actually really building equity. And then generally, as a rule of thumb, you're going to want a fixed interest rate, and most of these ag lenders will give it to you. There are times where you might consider a variable rate, but and we go in a little bit into that guide, but generally you're going to want a fixed rate. When I'm helping people try to figure out what they can afford and what the cost might be of a particular property, I just go to an online calculator. This is a screenshot from my computer. You can see it was 41 degrees when I put this slide together. This is just one that came up on Google that I like, calculator.net. And it's very simple. You plug in there the loan amount, the loan term, the interest rate. I put the 40-year 5.875% interest. That's what currently Farm Service Agency is providing for interest on a direct farm purchase loan. Their interest rates are publicly posted, and you can go on today and find out what they are. And so that's what I did. You can see with a $500,000 loan, you can see your monthly payment. You can also see that over the course of the loan, if you take 40 years, you're going to be paying $800,000 in interest. And then at the bottom left, you can see how much of your payment in year one is interest, how much is principal, and how much you'll have left at the end, and that you can take that all the way through the 40-year term. So we'll play around with different scenarios, with different lenders, different loan terms, just using this simple free online calculator. There's others out there if you want to have a different one. This one I like. So then you need to think about budgeting for other carrying costs too. And I see people miss this in their budget. What is going to be the property taxes? You might have a placeholder in there until you've got a specific property, but then that should be something that should be disclosed to you. Know that most of the time taxes go up, and so does insurance. You may want to get a quote once you've got a property in mind, or you may even talk to your insurance agent ahead of time to get an idea of what a general range of what insurance might cost you on a property. But that's really going to vary with the individual property. But we usually start with some sort of placeholder until we've got a clear answer from the insurance agent on a particular piece of property. One thing I see people don't put enough in their budget is for building maintenance, including your home, and the infrastructure maintenance. You want to be budgeting at least one purchase price, and maybe more, particularly if they're buildings, older barns and so forth that really need a lot of attention. The down payment. The down payment is typically, for most conventional lenders, would be about 20%. But the important thing to understand is that what the lender is actually looking at, what their criteria is the loan to value ratio. How much are they allowed to loan? What percent are they allowed to loan relative to the value of the property? So they're allowed to loan, in that case, 80% of the value, which of course for you then means you have to put 20% down. But the reason this is particularly important is the value is determined by the appraisal when you get into the contract period. So if it does not appraise, if the farm does not appraise for as much as the agreed upon price, they can only loan you 80% of what that appraisal says, not 80% of the price that you and the seller agreed to. So at that point, you're going to have to make a decision about how to proceed. Whether you're gonna drop the sale, whether you're gonna renegotiate the price, or if you have any additional cash to bring to the table. So the down payment for open land can be higher, as much as 50%. It may not be required at all with an FSA loan, and not just a direct loan, but a number of the loans that I've worked with farmers on over the last couple of years are joint financing between FSA and another lender. And in which case, half the loan went with the FSA, half the loan went with another lender, and still there still was no down payment. And I've seen that used more frequently, or the direct loan, than the beginner farmer down payment program that many of you have probably heard about. Closing costs. See, people miss this one a lot. So you typically want to budget 2 to 6% of the purchase price, or what you would estimate your purchase price might be, and see if you have that for closing. While FSA can sometimes roll the closing cost into the mortgage, most other lenders won't do that. You'll expect it to have cash on board. And FSA doesn't always roll it into the mortgage either. So you want to think about having some of your cash available for that. So typically that's $5,000 to $10,000 in one property transaction. But we've definitely seen 10 to 20,000, not unheard of, or even more than that. And it really depends on the property situation, the size of the property, the value of the property. Are there things required like a survey? Which certainly could be more expensive, and then we might split that with the seller. So there's a lot of variables there, but including the property transfer tax here in Vermont, we have one of the highest property transfer taxes apparently in the region, if not the country, but that's also what we use to fund conservation easements on farms and affordable housing. So it does go to some good cause. But you need to budget for that and these other closing costs that I have there, including the due diligence costs of septic and building inspections and so forth. And you might be expected to be covering the real estate commissions too in the new real estate commission environment. So who are the lenders? So conventional banks in many parts of the country do not want to deal with farms at all. Now that's not true sometimes in particularly rural or particularly agricultural areas. There often be some local conventional bank that might deal with farms, or they might be more likely to deal with the real estate because there's a saying that you can't get hurt with dirt. Where in other words, the collateral on farmland is usually pretty good. Where livestock die, equipment goes to hell, and they may not be able to reclaim it if they have to foreclose on you. But they might be willing to do a real estate loan with you. And in some cases, there are still community banks around the country that actually even have their own agricultural lender. So you're just going to have to explore what's in your area. Mutual banks are similar to credit unions. In the Northeast, we actually have the newest mutual bank in the country, Walden Mutual, which was specifically actually set up to do loans to farms and agriculture. I already mentioned farm credit. A lot of loans are done through farm credit. A lot of loans are done through FSA. A lot of them are done together as joint financing. And then some states have other public lenders. For instance, in Vermont, we have the Vermont Economic Development Authority has its own agricultural lender. And so they're often at the table for some of these real estate loans. And then there are the CDFIs, which are Community Development Financial Institutions. And sometimes they'll do agricultural loans. So I know that the Vermont Community Loan Fund, the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, they do agricultural lending as well. I'm not really going to talk about the last three. We'll get a little bit into these last three possible lenders, non-traditional lenders, next week, and we do in the guide cover them as well. But what I will say is that you have to treat all of these arrangements the same way as if you're working with a conventional lender. You have to recognize that you're going to need to make these payments in most cases, even the family, and you're going to need to do your own due diligence to make sure that this is a good arrangement for you. All right, so now you've got your financing basically figured out. You know what you have identified the property, and now you have to figure out what to offer. This is one of the most stressful things for anybody, trying to deal with real estate, especially now. So you want to figure out what is the property worth? What is the best offer that you can make based, of course, first by your business plan, what you can afford, but also what you really think the realistic price is going to be. Because if you get to the lender and it doesn't appraise for what you agree to, you're going to have difficulties at best. If you're working with a buyer's real estate agent, then they often can pull comparable sales and give you an idea of what's going on in the market. And you want to make sure that the comps that they're called comps that they're pulling are really comparable, because farms can have a lot of variables in terms of acreage and quality of soils and barns. And so you might need to be making some adjustments up or down with the comparisons. That's certainly what an appraiser would do. You can look at the recently sold properties on the real estate websites and public records. And actually Nathan's slide showed where they listed actually properties that were sold. And you want to see that because you don't care what people are asking. You want to know what did they actually sell it for. Particularly now as the market is starting to stabilize some, and they may not be getting their asking price. any of your trusted farm advisors, farm business advisors, people like us at Land for Good, we see a lot of these transactions. Sometimes we can give people a sense of what's going on, but can't guarantee it because we're not pulling necessarily all the comps, but we're often looking at appraisals or know what other sales have happened, and we might have a general sense of where things are at. I personally look at a lot of appraisals that with properties that I've worked with. Land trust staff, conservation staff sometimes can be able to give you an idea. Certainly, if you're working on getting an easement put on at the same time, or there's already an easement in place, then they might really be able to help you. Sometimes you'll find if you ask that there's actually been an appraisal that was recently done that they might be willing to share with you. I've actually been surprised. I've had a couple of transactions that I've helped farmers with where we found out that ahead of the sale, they had an appraisal done, and it was really helpful that they were actually willing to share it. And they're not always willing to do that, but it's great when they do. You may be able to get a new appraisal on the property, but that's generally not something that's going to be publicly listed. That's more likely in a for sale by owner situation where maybe there's a slower timetable and everybody's just trying to figure out how do we come to an agreement on what the price is. You may know other people who've recently bought farms, and if they bought it with financing, they had an appraisal done, and they might be able to share with you the appraisal.
Mike, you've got 3 minutes.
Okay, so I'll just quickly go through this one. You've got other consideration of market dynamics. Is it was fast market, people making above offer? What's the seller's motivations? Maybe they're not maybe their primary motivation isn't about maximizing the price if they can find a buyer who's actually a farmer. Are you actually going to also be purchasing a business and non-real estate asset from the same person? What's the condition of the property? If the property is in disrepair, maybe it wouldn't sell for what people are asking. And then your potential contingencies or requirements for sale. So when you go to actually make the offer, it's good if you're working with either a real estate agent or an attorney to help you understand what the local and state laws and customs are about making an offer and when it becomes a legal contract, because you don't want to make an offer that becomes a contract if you're really only trying to start with negotiations. And so often if you're doing that, you're going to have a letter of intent, a letter of interest, or a term sheet. And you're going to state in the letter, that's the purpose. The intention is to have negotiation, and then you're going to go to a contract. You should not just include the price, but also the major contingencies. And if you're offering less, you may want to explain yourself diplomatically, so maybe they understand why you're not offering full price. That's a little tricky area, but sometimes it's worth doing. You'll be prepared that you're going to probably need shortly after, if you get to a contract, to make a good faith deposit of 1 to 3% of the offer. That's negotiable sometimes if you don't have that readily available. Negotiations. If your offer is not accepted, try to find out why. And they may also give you a counter offer. Be diplomatic and consider the seller's positions and interests. Why are they thinking it's worth this amount? Is there something that you can help motivate them to negotiate with you to a certain meeting place? Don't make it personal or take it personal. This is business. Work with your advisors on trying to figure out what can you make a new offer? Can you alter your contingencies to make it more beneficial? So just a couple more slides here. So then you're going to get to a point of having a contract. This is a purchase and sales contract. And in there, you're going to have your contingencies. You really should work with a professional. Typically, I like to see people work with a real estate attorney, particularly one who knows farms if possible, but just a good real estate attorney to get a good contract together. You want to start with a reasonable closing date, because most people, maybe not the farm sellers or maybe not farm real estate agents that are really familiar with farms, but most people are expecting a 30 to 60-day closing period, particularly if you're going with farm service agency, but even some of the other farm lenders, you're often taking 5 months before you can get to closing. So you might as well start with the contract having a reasonable date. It's not going to be 30 or 60 days. It's more going to be like 150. Some of your most common contingencies, there will be a financing contingency. If you don't get financing, you get your deposit back. If it doesn't appraise as well, you're going to get your deposit back. Or some of these inspections don't fall through, you're out of the contract, you get your deposit back. Sometimes you might need more than these, and we cover in the guide some of the other contingencies. Once you sign the contract, you need to send a deposit to the escrow agent. You need to apply for financing and have your business plan updated and ready. What I see really stretches out the time period between contract and closing is when the buyer does not have their ducks in a row. They haven't looked at what the lender is going to want to have before we got to this point, and their lender is going back to, oh, I need this, I need this, I need this. Find that out ahead of time. It's going to streamline the process, particularly because typically the appraisal will not be ordered until typically after the loan application is considered complete, particularly with FSA, and before there's preliminary approval. And then appraisals are really in a lot of the parts of the country is what's slowing things down. And then you need to be on top of it to get all these other inspections and due diligence done. I can talk more about some of the side effect speed bumps later if people want. The closing, it's not uncommon to have to push back the closing date, but it needs to be by mutual consent. You will need to pay the remaining closing costs at that point. You're going to sign a lot of papers. Make sure you know what you're signing. And then finally, this is your farm dream. You need to know what to do to keep it. It's not uncommon for things to not go as to plan, especially in the few years. Building contingencies, be ready to pivot. Keep track of cash flow and production metrics monthly, if not weekly, so that you see problems coming. Talk to your advisors when problems come and communicate with your lenders. There's a saying that there's two people you want to be honest with, your preacher and your lenders. You don't want to try to pretend like you're going to hide it from them, because if things aren't going wrong, they're often willing to help you. They want to see you succeed. And the biggest mistake I see people, when they're getting in trouble, they try to hide it from their lender until it becomes such a problem that the lenders can't help them anymore. So that is my presentation.
Great.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mike. Kathy, I'm happy to make the transition. Thank you. Mike, that was excellent. Really appreciate that outline. I learned some things even in that process. We're not going to move. We're going to save the questions till the very end. I know we're covering a lot of ground. I hope people will be patient with us. We're now going to move to the real world farm purchasing stories of two farm businesses. I want to express my gratitude to both of them. It's a form of cruel and unusual punishment to ask someone to tell their story about buying a farm in 10 minutes. That's just not right, but that's what we're doing. Our first farm business comes to us from Ohio. Marykate Glenn of Mustard Seed Farms will now present.
I'm glad to be here. I'm sharing my screen and we'll jump in. I'm Marykate from Mustard Seed Farm. I'm going to talk about purchasing land in Claremont County, Ohio with an FSA loan. I'm 1/3 of Mustard Seed Farm. We're 3 farmers collaborating to run a pay-as-you-can CSA in Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky. 200-member CSA plus wholesales. We've been growing on land that we don't own for many years, and working together, we're hoping to form a co-op. We want to go for the distance together. Access to stable, permanent land was the way we knew we'd be able to do that. So a little bit of background on me individually. You can read through some of this, but I started farming internships in 2008. Here we are in 2025, and now I'm purchasing farmland. It's been a long road. The farm criteria that we were looking for, big one for us after some negative previous experience, was land that's not prone to flooding, access to water, zoning, land use history, things that have been discussed already, but specifically within an hour of Cincinnati, because this farm business I started in 2019, so my market is in Cincinnati. Each grower hoped to find about 5 acres, so that's kind of the scale that we're looking at. Road frontage that would allow for parceling. And my search process involved my own individual search, but also involved these other farm partners and our partners, our husbands, boyfriends. Research was, of course, first and foremost, took years researching, interviewing FSA loan officers, asking lots of questions, and really getting to know my market and my business plan. Explored collective purchase of land for years, had lots of potlucks, endless shared documents, and we were really coming to see through that process and seeing other people going through that process that we really needed to be not too strict with our non-negotiables in what we were looking for. We watched folks stall out, like waiting for years to find the right property is the norm, but we saw folks just stall out entirely. We didn't want to do that. So we did things in the course of looking for land, like announcing the search to our CSA community, writing letters to property owners who hadn't even listed their property, just letting them know, like, hey, we'd buy from you. Talking with area farmers, real estate agents specializing in rural properties, and of course, scouring Zillow. And I've jokingly said to Nathan, of course, this is the wrong answer, but that's how we found the property was through Zillow. But you know, it also took all of the other, like pounding the pavement and talking with our community. You can read some of the other bullet points here of what happens after that, but negotiating a sale is a big part of what happens in this process. I looked at, I think this is actually from a previous slide, but I only ended up looking at 4 properties, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but for the area that I was looking for with the requirements that we had, there weren't a whole lot of properties that met these criteria. And we also haven't seen many since come on the market. The offers that I made, I wanted, you know, like if this is, I want to give my all and like really be in if I want to make this happen. So offers, counter offers. The FSA application that I did was accepted for a max amount. So the trick here in my particular case was counter offers can't go higher unless I want to go back and do the whole application again. And that's something that I needed to make clear to the real estate agent I was working with. Trying to leverage what you can to entice the seller is an important thing to consider. The property that we ended up getting is 25 acres total, 12 acres cleared, 5 acres of overgrown hops trellis and irrigation. There's water at the street. You can read a little bit more about it, but we're planning on the 2 other farmers to purchase parcels of this property this coming winter. And there's a little picture of it, aerial view you can see. And this picture here is the 40 by 80 barn that I'm walking up to here. That is just perfect for, you know, 3 farm operations coming together. So here's a little bit of information on the FSA farm down payment loan. So this is the beginning farmer loan that Mike was referencing. A couple things to note here. Payments need to come from our farm income, if that is not clear. And when income increases, the farmer graduates out of that low interest loan. So that 40-year loan is most likely, if all things go to plan, is not going to be 40 years with FSA. They're going to graduate you when your business is doing well. And in my case, with the participating lender, that other joint lender, graduating to the higher interest loan. Important to note, like, what is the point at which you graduate and how much income, what percentage of your income needs to be farm income? That's all going to come down to who's the FSA loan officer in your area, in the county where you are buying. And so you can ask lots of questions, but it's going to come down to what's the actual property that you're talking about. If you can find a farmer in that area who can say what their experience was, that would be amazing. Some of my top tips, if you are potentially going to go this route, for putting your application together, even if it's years in the future, you can start building your 3-year history and 3-year projection of yields following FSA's formatting. So hopefully we're all doing great record keeping, but if you can follow FSA's formatting now, which is a little clunky in my experience, that will save you a lot of time. So look at those forms and make your tracking now follow that format. Getting a business plan together, balance sheets and income statements, as Mike was talking about, really making the case for why your farm business is positioned to afford this loan. And as some people have mentioned, the agricultural loans like this are built for commodities growers, and a lot of folks on this call are perhaps diverse specialty crop growers, and you're going to have to shoehorn your application into a form that is made for 2 or 3 crops, and that's hard to do, so keep that in mind. I worked with an FSA loan officer who was really great about helping through that process and didn't discourage me. In some other areas, that might not be your experience. Another key player in the process for me was Kingston National Bank, who was on a list of other traditional lenders that FSA had worked with in the area, in that county previously. And I needed to do a lot of the legwork to find that particular bank who would be willing to do a guaranteed loan. Guaranteed loan was, in my case, the key vocab word. And then Ohio Department of Ag Beginning Farmer Tax Credit Program was a program that I accessed that helped me sweeten the deal for the seller by offering this tax credit in the year of the sale. So 3.99% of the total sale price. If that can be a way that you leverage your specific beginning farmer superpowers to access land, go for it. And then of course, real estate agents, and Mike talked about how they're not always up to speed on farm purchase, and definitely not FSA. So I would advise everyone, of course, to find what leverage you can. So I need to show FSA that I wouldn't qualify for a loan from a traditional lender in order to qualify for the FSA beginning farmer loan with that low interest rate. It's not for me if I can get a loan elsewhere, but I also needed to get another lender to agree to the participation loan. And I needed to demonstrate to both of them at the same time that the farm business would be profitable enough to repay the loan. So kind of a catch-22, but my specific financial background, for full disclosure here, I had no student loan debt, but that also means I had very little credit history. I had low expenses. All my work experience is farm related, and I filed Schedule F tax returns for the previous 4 years. So while my income was low, it was from a profitable farm business, and that's what FSA is looking for. I have no chance with a commercial lender, but FSA, this is what this program is for. Even with the extra work, with the wait times and the nail biting of, really questioning, is this going to go through? It was all worth it. In the end, as a lot of us know, it's tenuous in this real estate market for beginning and small farmers to access land, and FSA loan was really the only option for me that would have come through. And now myself and 2 other local farmers are able to steward land regeneratively in our area and produce food for our community, and we're really excited about that. There's a lot more to this story, and so like Nathan was saying, feel free to email me, and especially if there's questions about collaborative farming. That's like one thing about my story that is also like, couldn't have done it another way, couldn't have been able to afford it without 2 other growers, parceling this land so that in the future my payments are lower, but also down to supporting each other so I could even do the search for land while CSA season is still going, having 2 other people covering CSA pickups. So I'm more than happy to, I'd love to share more of this information with fellow farmers, and wish you all the best in the grueling search for permanent farmland. Thanks, y'all.
Thanks so much, Marykate. I know we have a question already for you, but we'll wait for that for the very end. We're next going to have Marcy from Trogg's Hollow Farm share her experience. Marcy.
Hi, we're here, and Chris literally just
And
came
Chris,
home from delivery, so he's here. Let me share my screen. Give me a second here. Okay. All right. So we are Chris and Marcy. We're from Trogg's Hollow CSA and Market Farm. We're in Poplar Grove, Illinois, which is located in Boone County, up at basically the state line. We're 10 minutes from Wisconsin. We started our business in the city of Elgin, which is closer to the city of Chicago, back in 2008. But we've been in Poplar Grove since 2012. We are a family farm. So it's us and our 4 grown adult to young adult children who help. We have 11 acres, and we are a vegetable farm that practices regenerative agriculture and chemical-free growing. We also raise pigs, chickens, and ducks. So that's a little bit about us. Oh, and we have a 30-member CSA, and we do farmers markets. So our story is I know I have a very short period of time. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible. We have been, as I said, farming since 2008, and we started in our yards in Elgin. We had owned a home and owned 2 adjacent homes and all the land, and we rented the homes. But we knew we needed to expand because our family was growing and our operation was growing. So we had been looking since about 2008. The first thing we did was visit other small farming operations to make sure that we kind of had an idea of what we wanted and what we didn't want. And in the meantime, we were farming in our yards. Well, unfortunately, in 2011, Chris, who was working a conventional job as an accountant, was laid off. And that forced us to declare bankruptcy, and we lost our house, the 2 rentals, which was what all of our money was tied up in. And that was the college funds for the kids, our savings, and the land we were using. So all of a sudden, this sort of casual looking became a much more urgent process. Even though bankruptcy is kind of a long process, we knew that there was a deadline. And honestly, we were getting closer and closer to just finding an apartment, renting some land. So yeah, that was kind of how things started for us. What were we looking for? We wanted something, it had to be in Northern Illinois, which is where we were, within a 2-hour drive from Chicago, because we were serving Chicago and the suburbs. We needed a house that we could move into immediately, and that was big enough and safe enough for our very young family at the time. We needed 5 workable acres that didn't include the house and other buildings. And we preferred a barn or another outbuilding, but it wasn't required. Our main goal was land we could use and a house that we could move into right away. The things that limited us were the fact that we had 4 small children from the ages of 12 down to a brand new baby. We had 2 unconventionally employed adults. So Chris was now laid off and farming. At that point, I worked part-time for university. I still do that, but it was only part-time. We had 2 dogs. We had just declared bankruptcy, and we had 0 savings. So we were coming at it with absolutely no money, but something we needed to do. So we just kept looking because we knew we needed to get out of the situation we were in. These are my bullet points about our search process. You can read through them, but I'll go through them quickly. This is specific to us, but also not, because it is exhausting. As Marykate said, you're, looking and looking and looking. And Nathan, you talked about Greta and the 4 years that she looked every night at properties. And that's what you need to do. You need to have a plan, and you need to have, we had a realtor, but somebody to work with you, and they need to know what your plan is so that they can help you look for the right place. You need to visit the places in person whenever you can, because what you see on paper or on the internet could be incredibly different from what you actually see. I mean, we saw places that looked great online, and then we went and there was a hole burned in the floor in the house or whatever, and we couldn't do that because we had children. You have to keep looking, even when you don't want to. Use the people around you. Don't let yourself be pushed around by the people who are trying to sell. Stay firm, and also have an open mind. So it's kind of, you're walking a fine line there. Nothing's going to be perfect, but you can find something that's going to work for you. So you just have to keep the faith. Don't let it grind you down. And don't be afraid to negotiate. Yeah. We found multiple candidates, but there was only going to be one that was going to work. We bid on more than one. People have different priorities. The people that you're bidding, on their properties, they may think something is of more value maybe than you do. and things are more important to certain people than others. Like we looked at a lot of horse farms, and I think people put a different value on horse farms because they put a lot of money into their buildings. And to us, that wasn't the important part. Don't worry about hurting people's feelings. I think a couple of people have touched on this. It's not personal. You are looking for your place. Some sellers are going to be more firm on price. Some will be willing to negotiate and have an inspection done because you just need to know what you're stepping into. It doesn't mean you're not going to step into it, but you want to see what's there ahead of you. So for us in 2012, we found our farm. We are in, as I said, Boone County, which is that little red county in Illinois. And the other side is the map of the land that we use, the aerials from a couple years ago. But then, okay, so great, we found a farm. But as I said, we had nothing. We had declared bankruptcy, no savings, farm income. So for us, we had to lean on our support system. Chris's parents were both willing and able to help us. And that is a gift. And we both know that. But this goes along with maybe you can't do it yourself, but you can find somebody who can help. And for us, my father-in-law was able to get a VA loan. And so that is something to consider, is that for some people, maybe you don't think about a VA loan for property, but they are available. And so that's the process that we went through with them. So we're forever grateful. But, okay, so we'd found it, but the VA itself does have specific contingencies. So we had to have an inspection done, which we would have done anyway, but the VA required it. And the things that we had to have done, or actually the family before we bought it from them had to do, was clear the attic of bats because there was a colony of them in our attic. Paint the exterior of the buildings, redo the electricity. There were things they had to do to make the property considered safe for a veteran who was purchasing it. We also decided to get a survey done. We cannot recommend enough getting a survey done. That did extend the process for us, but it was one of the most valuable tools for us in this process, was paying for and having the survey done. So for us, obviously we didn't have any money. So his parents bought the property, but we have a land contract. I won't go super in depth because I know at some point you guys are going to cover land contracts, but basically we make our mortgage payments to my in-laws. For us, there are no extra fees. The whole thing would depend on the kind of contract you come up with. If you get somebody to buy a property for you, this allows us to, build up our credit and build up a reputation for paying regularly on a mortgage. And the bank sees that. And eventually we hope to take over the mortgage, but right now this is working out really well for everybody. So we're not in a rush to do that. We're still allowing ourselves to rebuild our credit. Bankruptcy lasts 7 years on your record. So we're just on the other side of it, really. What did we get out of all of that? We got a house we could move into. It was much bigger than we expected, but it was in great shape. We wound up on a main road, which wasn't a priority for us, but was super nice because we were able to set up a farm stand almost right away. We're in the country, but we're really close to the city of Rockford and less than 2 hours from the city of Chicago. So we have access to basically everything. We have an 11-acre farm with 2 outbuildings, which was awesome. Land that we found had been abused, not intentionally, but it just hadn't been well maintained, but that had a lot of potential, and incredibly curious neighbors who all wanted to know what we were doing. But actually a lot of them have wound up to be, have expanded our support system for us. Challenges that we encountered above and beyond the fact that we had declared bankruptcy, that in itself being a challenge. The search for us was more difficult because we were in the midst of a national real estate crisis. So when we moved out of our property in Elgin, basically every other house on our street was being foreclosed on or was up for sale, which is why we couldn't just sell the houses and avoid the bankruptcy. And so you were in a situation where people needed to sell property, but they also had to sell property for a certain amount. There were short sales on things, but it was a very complicated time to be looking for property. The 11 acres that we're on is split, and we didn't know that until we had the survey done. And it was a source of issues with neighboring farmers, but it's been worked out. The land has taken a long time for us to modify naturally, but we're doing it. We can't grow root crops because of our clay soil. We can't have goats because there's coccidia living in our soil from years of sheep farming. So we moved away from goats eventually and went to hogs. So that was surprising. Old buildings can be cool, but also not cool. Rural areas have a different definition of codes, like what's acceptable to use as a septic tank, for example. But it was all absolutely worth it. I mean, I think we've learned a lot of lessons. Maybe we would approach some things differently just because we've learned things. But I think overall, you know, we're still here since 2012. This is where our kids have now grown up. So yeah, do you have anything to add? We've got a couple seconds left here.
No.
Okay.
I think
So that is it for me. Now I have to unshare. So
Great. Chris and Marcy, thank you so much. Kathy, I'm going to turn it over to you to moderate some questions. I know there are a number of
Sure.
those came up.
Yeah, we didn't have a lot, but they're super interesting. Mike, I'm going to throw a couple of quick ones your way. One of the questions was about how do you find out about biosolids? Where do you test? That was a particular reference that you made in your, can you give a one sentence answer to that?
Yeah, I think that know whether it's been spread, it really should be something that the property owner discloses if they're aware of it. I don't know if there's anything that like find out if there's any kind of municipal records on that, because it tends to come
Okay.
from municipal plants. The testing is a more complicated question. We're actually, and for good, we're actually doing our monthly professional development training on PFAS contamination next week. So in a week, I might be able to tell you better.
All right, we can share with the group here. Another quick one, where would you go to get advice on the soil condition?
Well, if you're not familiar with soils suitably yourself, then if the government opens back up, then I would go to NRCS because sometimes they're willing, if they have time, they're not going to have any time once they get back to work now. But that, you know, sometimes I found NRCS people that are willing to come out, or extension people from university extension will be willing to come out and perhaps help you evaluate the soils conditions. Or a
Great.
private consultant. There are a lot of crop consultants
Private
out
crop
there.
consultant. One more specific one is who does farm inspections? Both the,
So there isn't,
right, go ahead.
yeah, there isn't just one farm inspection, right? So there's going to be, depending on what you're looking at, so they might have one inspector for the septic system. They're pretty much out there. There's building inspectors who typically will do inspections on houses, but some of them may be available to do inspections on buildings. And then, you know, it's probably going to be up to you, or maybe there's some consulting firms, environmental consulting firms that could do soil consulting, you know, to do if there is a concern about contamination, it might get to the point where you need a level 1 or a level 2 test, and then you need an environmental consulting firm. And now we're getting into something that's really complicated and you hopefully don't have to deal with and may just walk away from. Yeah, and as far as inspecting anything else, you may just bring out, you know, other farmers as well, or contractors that you know that maybe, or say irrigation contractors or something like that, that people that might be able to give you an idea about any of the infrastructure that you're trying to evaluate. If it's a dairy farm, that you know, people that do the dairy equipment might be able to give you an idea what's going on there, that kind of thing.
And then on the residential end, a realtor will often have recommendations about who's a building inspector to look for asbestos, or like you said, the septic, water quality
Right.
specific.
Right. And the real estate attorneys often will have recommendations on the septic and the building inspector, you know, the house inspectors.
Yeah. So good to lean on the professionals that you're working with to help you find other professionals. Couple of questions for Marykate. There was a question about where to find the FSA tracking form. And Mike, I believe you put that link in the chat. So for those of you who can access the chat, you'll be able to find that there.
I'm not sure if that's exactly where Marykate was getting the forms, but I know that they have forms downloaded from that website that I posted.
Okay. And then
Second
another
link.
for Marykate, a quick one. You had mentioned something about parceling land. Somebody wanted to know what that is.
Yeah, parceling is where you purchase a property and then have the property lines redrawn so that you can sell off a section of it. And so the property that I bought, we're hoping to this winter parcel off a 5-acre section, a 5-acre section, and then I'll still hold the section with the larger section with the barn and more woods. And so that's how I'll be able to afford, my loan payments will be lower, and FSA will allow, it's called a partial release. If you have a go with a different lender, that's something that you do need to ask for. If you're hoping to parcel off part of the property after purchasing, you need to ask the lender if there will be anything wrong with that in the case of your loan.
I think in some spaces it might be called subdividing. Doesn't necessarily mean for a development subdivision. It means dividing the land into smaller or other parcels. So then there were a couple of sort of bigger, higher altitude questions about collaborating as a group. And we're just at about time ending. I do want to say that Land for Good does have a publication called Farming Together about group approaches to land, group land access. And I would say that that's a great topic for a conversation. And we might try to fit that in a little bit at the next session. And I think that was all the questions. People were so intent on listening, they forgot to think about their questions. So Nathan, you want to take it over and remind people we're willing to stay on?
Sure, that sounds great. So we're now at the closing time for the webinar. We're grateful that you've joined us. We're going to officially end the webinar here. We are also going to encourage everyone, if you can, to respond to a feedback survey we'll be sending to you. And we're actually going to have raffle prizes, a raffle drawing to provide extra incentive for people because it's super important for our funding and for us to understand the impact of our work. So thank you for joining us. Make sure you come back next Thursday. If you do want to hang on for another probably 10 minutes max, we'd be happy to have more conversation and dialogue with Mike and our farmers who are so kind to join us. So thank you again for joining us. If you want to stay on, please do.
And if anybody,
Marykate, can I ask a question? So how have you and your farming partners already decided how much you're going to sell it for to them? And was that set by appraisal, or how did you figure out the pricing?
That's a great question. FSA specifically has a rule where you have to, if you're going to parcel and sell, it has to go at market rate. So you can't sell to a family member or friend or whoever for $1 for 5 acres. So it'll be, yeah, it was appraised and we'll probably go off of that appraisal, and my farm partners are okay with that.
Nice. And to answer the question that came up in the chat, yes, we are recording this. It'll be turned into a YouTube before long, and we'll send that YouTube link out to all the registrants for the arrangement. Can I ask a question of Marcy and Chris? Did you have a lawyer or attorney work out that land contract with Chris's parents?
Yeah, that is something that we didn't go over. We did have an attorney the whole process, an actual real estate attorney who knew these things and was advising exactly where we should push or not push regarding the laws about the loans and the land contract. And he did arrange all of that. But he specifically a real estate attorney.
Got it. And so that VA loan was not for farms specifically, but a secondary property, right?
Yes, it was. That's how it was able to get done because my parents lived elsewhere in the state. I think it was 100-mile rule or something. They could purchase a second home, and that's what they did. And we converted it to a land contract. I want to say 3 years later. I think it was by 2015 we had the paperwork worked out with the county. And now, because we have that land contract, instead of when you rent, you don't get to take the deduction for your real estate taxes, at least in Illinois. You don't get to take the homeowner exemption when you're renting. because we have a land contract, we are the homeowners and we get that exemption from our property taxes, and we get the tax refunds from mortgage interest and things like that. So yeah, it was important to make that official, but it does take some time, and it takes some proof to the banks and to the county as well to make sure that you've got everything signed and dotted properly.
Excellent. Thank you.
If I got to ask a question on that, I don't remember if you said, but my typical understanding of a land contract is that the title doesn't actually transfer to you until the contract is complete.
That is correct. It is still in their name.
Right. But that why I got confused was the thing about the taxes, but that must be an Illinois law that allows for the taxes to be treated as if the title was in your name.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just in Illinois. I just know the lawyer said that this is what would happen, and we would get a a lesser amount on at least our property taxes. I want to say it's $1,000 deduction, like a homeowner exemption in Illinois, and that's basically, well, I don't want to say that's all it is because that matters, but that's what that was for. Yeah.
And is the contract, when you complete the contract, will title transfer at that point, or is there like still going to be residual left that you're going to have to refinance?
Okay, we shouldn't have to refinance, but we may have to pay to have the title transferred because it will be as if a sale had been completed unless we do it beforehand. And the same thing would happen, and then we'd have to pay the rest of the mortgage. But if we saw it through the 30 years, it would be a transfer of property. And then, at least in Illinois, and at least right now, who knows and when this happens, we'll have to pay the real estate transfer taxes and all of that goes with it. But the plan and the way ours is structured is that at the end of the term, if we have not taken over the loan already, it will just transfer hands. And again, this is a special situation because it is my parents, but so there's no, hey, we want to make money off of us situation. But it was not just them at that time that had talked about being willing to do it either. In fact, our lawyer and his wife actually talked about doing the same thing for us if we couldn't find somebody else.
So it was kind of like what you were talking about, where you were talking about group funding, crowdfunding, all that. It was just kind of figuring out who was best equipped to help us, because lucky for us, we might not have had the ability to buy something, but we had multiple friends and family who were. So
So there's several questions about how to find help developing a business plan, which we've stressed as a prerequisite for purchasing land. There's plenty of farm business planning resources out there. I don't know, Nathan or Mike, if you want to say anything about that in particular, but I think, somebody mentioned about Ohio State. I mean, there's plenty out there. Sorry, Mike.
Mike, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, I'll just speak to that. It will, vary somewhat on what state that you're on, because there are different, state programs that are available sometimes for farmers to help them with business plans. Sometimes it's direct one-on-one. Sometimes there are courses. This is particularly the time of year where a lot of the courses are being offered either by the departments of agriculture or more commonly your local extension. Sometimes there are business extension agents that have specific responsibilities towards helping farmers with business plans. There's a lot of online resources these days, and then including the USDA website that I put in answer to one of the other questions has some resources there. But there's also an online tool that still seems to be kind of the standard a lot of people go to. The University of Minnesota's Ag Plan. That's one that's an online do-it-yourself kind of business planning program that still seems to be the standard one out there that people get referred to. But you're not going to be getting the one-on-one assistance. I don't think they're offering any additional support there. But there are plenty of, often in your own state, you may find there's plenty of direct individual support.
Yeah, I agree. I think with some research, you'll be able to find numerous resources. We have time for, I believe, one more. Somebody from our neck of the woods, Connecticut. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did you sell the one from Connecticut?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
got it.
the lender said that if any of the outbuildings were in need of rehab, a farm loan would not cover the rehab or restoration. It would need to be a separate loan. So the question is, what's the good method to address this issue? And also the house will need to be rehabbed and require a construction loan. Mike, I'm asking you to weigh in on that
Yeah, so we
briefly.
do, we do cover that in the guide in more detail. The guide will be coming out this winter. I actually moved a slide out because I knew I didn't have enough time. That was specifically on this. The issue off, farm loan can cover that sort of thing if there's enough equity there and the cash flow. But the problem is if you're borrowing 100% or most of it, there may not be equity to cover that additional loan. And that's probably really what the problem is. Not that the farm loan couldn't. And so it really is looking at that individual situation and saying, well, what can you live with for the time being and work around? Secure the property, move into hopefully a safe environment. I know one farm that I worked with a long time ago, the kids ended up with lead poisoning because they didn't have the money for the lead abatement, or I actually didn't know that the state of Vermont had a lead abatement program that would have paid for the whole thing. But if it's safe enough to move in, if you can tolerate it and work to the point where you do have the cash flow or enough equity for the additional, the additional borrowing later, then you take away a piecemeal. I'm sitting here in a house that was built in 1840 in one town and moved in 1880, and I've lived in it for 25 years. I'm still working on it.
Right. I have actually one last quick question that I think Marcy and Chris and Mary Kate could answer very quickly. So you're searching for a long time, looking at a lot of places, learning a lot of things. How did you keep track of information about everything that you're learning and seeing?
I don't know.
I mean,
We knew what we liked. I think that was the key, is that when you saw something that wasn't going to work, it was like, fine, we don't have to worry about that anymore.
Okay.
And then the places that were potentials, we tried to move, like, if we looked at them again, or we talked to our realtor and said, okay, this is something that might work. But it was like a process of elimination, because there was just a point where it was like, that's not going to work.
I just want to add to that. Marcy didn't know as much about this, but I'm an accountant by birth. And of course, I had spreadsheets set up everywhere. So,
Okay,
yes, it was mostly talk about it and remember it. But I had a spreadsheet that said, okay, we're going to look at these places. Yeah, that's how my head works.
Thanks, Chris. How about you, Mary Kate?
Yeah, for me, it was also definitely spreadsheets, but because I'm working with 2 other people, we were already using Discord. We were already using shared Google spreadsheets to address, because there's some really exciting people in the chat are connecting on maybe they should join in on searching together. And just wanted to speak very briefly to collaborators. It really helped in our case that we started slow and did low risk things together in the first years working together. There isn't a co-op until this coming winter. We've been like having our farm businesses do a seed order together, and then I'll wholesale some stuff from you, and then let's do one CSA season together collaboratively, and building without, like a dating relationship. We're doing something that some couples don't even do together. It's very high risk. And so like easing our way in together was how we got to this point. And even still, parceling rather than co-ownership of the whole thing allows, if someone needs to get out, they can get out. And that was something we explicitly talked about from the beginning, was we want to ensure that everyone has that option.
That's awesome. All right,
Hey,
Kathy,
Nathan?
Mike, do you have? Yes, Chris.
I just wanted to add one thing. It's going back to the question, but I wanted to add this regarding the business plan. If anybody is in the area of a craft organization, that's CRAFT. It stands for Collaborative Regional Alliance for Farmer Training. A lot of them have a farm beginnings program. In Northern Illinois, we have a State Line Farm Beginnings. I believe Central Illinois has a Farm Beginnings program as well. And the main point of that program is to get you guys set up with a business plan so you can go to banks for your loans, whether it's a property or a tractor. And like I said, it's Collaborative Regional Alliance for Farmer Training. And it's been years since I've worked with them because COVID, and I haven't done that. But ours is Northern Illinois Craft, and I know a bunch on the East Coast at least, and down towards the Southeast Coast. But that's just one big thing that you can use for learning that too.
Wonderful. With that, we are really going to end this, although I think we could keep going. Marcy, Chris, and Marykate, thank you so much for all the work that you put into your presentations and sort of making all this information and experience available to so many people. Mike and Kathy, thank you again, of course. We're going to close it here. Look forward to seeing everybody. We'll be sending an email to all attendees and registrants with email addresses for all of the speakers today, as well as a feedback survey, which we hope you'll complete. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.